Happy Friday. Happy Friday to the Husky Nation. We are back for our first episode of the Husky podcast. I am your host, Elfred Rawls Dill, and I am now Director of K through 5 Curriculum Instruction here in Matawan Aberdeen Regional School District. Huge shout out to the K through 5 teachers and a special shout out to the 6 through 12 folks too in pre-K. We have pre-K now. I can't forget about that in our pre-K family. It's an exciting day. I mean, as you can see, it took me a little longer to get dressed this morning. I am in my Lord Vader, Darth Vader costume in early celebration of Halloween. If you do celebrate Halloween, this is an early celebration tribute for me to everyone. It was pretty exciting getting dressed this morning. I haven't gotten dressed for Halloween in many, many years. So it was a cool thing to do, getting up this morning. It took a little longer and I needed more help than usual getting up in the morning, getting dressed. So with that said, this is our very, very, very first episode of the Husky to Husky podcast. And we have a great, great, great guest. Well, I should say first episode of year 2. So we had a 10-month series last year where we made it to over 30 episodes. And now we have arrived at our second year. And remember, what we like to do here is highlight our special teachers. We have some great educators out here in Matawan, and this show is about telling their story. So we get an opportunity to hear those stories and get a sense and feel of how our educators grew up, what school was like for them, and how they made it here to Matawan Aberdeen Regional School District. Before we get going and introduce today's special guest, as usual, we want to give a huge shout out to our Board of Education, our Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Jay Micah, who I know is tuning in as well. So shout out to you all for encouraging and for helping us to do the things that we need to do the best for children. So huge, huge, huge shout out to all of you out there who do that. And last but not least, to my special director, executive producer, Darlene Gallagher, who behind the scenes puts a lot of this stuff together. Huge shout out to you, Darlene, as usual. So with that out of the way, let's hear from our guest today. We have our special guest who is a longtime educator here in Matawan Aberdeen Regional School District. One of the first folks that I met in just going through the interview process, as a matter of fact, here in Matawan. He is working now as an interventionist in the area specializing in mathematics in our grade 4 and 5 building over at Lloyd Road. Shout out to Christina, shout out to Joe over there and all of the teachers over there doing great things. And he's also our union president, the president of our union, our Teachers Association here in Matawan. So without further ado, welcome to Casey Barilka. How are you doing?
I'm good, Alfred. How are you doing? Good morning.
I'm doing great. And this is, Casey, I got to tell you, this is the first or the earliest show we've had. So you got it.
Yeah, me too. When I was driving to work today, I'm like, the sun's not even up, which is unusual for me.
Yeah, I said when I saw it on the schedule, I said, Darlene, are you sure it's 7:30, right? She said, yeah. I said, okay, all right. This is a first. We've had a Saturday show. We've had Monday through Friday already covered. Now we have our earliest show. Our latest show was a 5 o'clock show. And the only thing missing is a Sunday show. We have not done a Sunday show yet. So we'll see if anyone signs up for that one. So, Casey, as I was saying, in starting off the show, we're really eager to hear stories. We heard over 30 educator stories last year in our first year. And, we were, as a matter of fact, Darlene and I were doing book inventorying late summer at the early start of the school year. And you had come into the library over at Lloyd Road and we kind of recruited you on the spot to join in. So what we would love to hear, Casey, and we hear this from all of our guests, is if you could take a few moments just to kind of go back and tell us about, what growing up was like for you, what your school experiences were like, and so on and so forth.
Sure. So I grew up in Cliffwood Beach, but in the Old Bridge section. So there's actually 2 Cliffwood Beach sections. One is the Aberdeen side. One is the Old Bridge side. It's basically a bridge that separates Middlesex and Monmouth County. I went to school at elementary school, moving on my way up. And my mother always likes to tell me that I always would push the envelope in school with my teachers, always in the first marking period. And I remember her saying to me that, in first grade, you got 7 needs improvements on your report card in the first marking period because you always questioned everything that the teacher did. And I was like, oh, okay. And she's like, after that, once they laid down the law, you figured out like how you were supposed to do what you're supposed to do. And I said, oh, okay. So, growing up, it was typical. I have 2 brothers, the normal brother nonsense that kids do together. I played sports when I was a kid. I played a lot of baseball, played baseball in high school, liked to play hockey out in the street with my friends. My dad wouldn't let me play because he said I was a little too small to be playing ice hockey, and it was a decent expense to play. And my dad was the only one that worked. My mom stayed home and took care of us. Although before she had kids, she owned her own hair salon. And then once she had kids, she kind of stayed home, and she did that until we were in high school, my brothers and I, because my younger brother is 11 months younger than me. So we were kind of close. So once we got into high school, she went back to work. And, then I went to Middlesex County College, got my associates there, went to Kane, majored obviously in elementary education. And my second major was psychology. And while I was there, I played on the hockey team because I finally got to play hockey, which was really exciting for me. And then I kind of wound up here. I put out a couple of applications, did a couple of, I did one interview, which was here. And I remember when I got the phone call, a gentleman by the name of Frank Tanzini, he said, well, how are your other interviews going? And I said, well, I don't know. I didn't have any yet. And he goes, well, do you want to work in Mattawan? And I was like, sure, I'll work in Mattawan. So, and originally I was slated to go work at Ravine Drive, but then they filled the slot there. And I've been at Lloyd Road ever since. I've only taught at this building, and I basically got hired. I taught 4th grade. And while I was here, I've taught, typical 4th grade students. I taught G&T and Richmond. Then I moved to 5th grade, did 5th grade ICR with another teacher, which was a good experience to have, just seeing and learning different ways that you can help students that, aren't necessarily the students that when you went to college you were trained to work with. That was insightful, which has actually helped me in terms of my current job as an interventionist. And learning from someone else within the classroom was something that was beneficial to me.
Awesome, man. You jam-packed that with so much for us to unpack. And I want to go back, if you don't mind, to
Sure.
You started off, and I know you said you had a younger brother who was 11 months younger, but then now is your other brother older?
Yeah, he's 2.5 years older.
Okay, all right. So you're right there in the middle. So
I'm the middle child. Everyone will tell you I'm the middle child.
Got that middle child thing going on, and
without a doubt.
Yep, but you talked about, which kind of leads to me to this a little bit. Those needs of improvement, all of those needs of improvement coming up on the report card, and you like to question things. So, but you said that once you kind of I just wanted to unpack that a little bit. Do you feel like once you kind of understood, okay, this is the lay of the land, now I got it, so it's less questioning, or do you just think that you're just a natural questioner?
No, I can be a pain. I mean, that's who I am. Like I see things as just being, and I've just kind of always been this way, as just a black and white, right and wrong kind of person. And if I saw something happening in class, and I can't think of any specifics, but my mother would just say, you would just question things, which like you shouldn't have been doing because, it's kind of old school. You're in the, late 70s, early 80s, and it's, you're adults. You're not supposed to question what they do. And then obviously I figured out how to play the game. It was just a game, at that point of, listen, just be quiet, do your work. And even if I was right, my mother was always just like, listen, you're wrong. You don't get to question what other adults are saying and doing. And I was just like, okay, that's fair. And, it kind of, as I matured and got older, it kind of made things a little easier. For me, the other thing too was, and my mother will say this, like I was a big crier when I was a kid. So I think she tried to get me out of the house as soon as she can. So I started kindergarten when I was 4. So I was kind of immature every year, like behind, and not to say that one year is really any different. I think I still would have been doing the same things, like questioning my first grade picks, but it is what it is. And, once you learn how to handle those things, and as a first grader, it's kind of hard to learn those things. You kind of just incrementally move along. And I think about things like that with my own kids. Like, you want to be able to tell them something and, hey, I told you that. How come you just don't do it? And it just doesn't work like that. Like they're young, they're immature. Now my kids are older, obviously. One's 12 and one's 15. And they, but as they're building towards that, you have to be patient. And I think back to myself as to like, well, my mother was very patient with me. So I should try to be doing the same thing with them in terms of if they're not, getting everything right away. And I have to be very patient with my, my daughter, because my daughter's kind of like me. She'll get, if she doesn't get something right away, she'll get flustered by it, upset. So, I take a more patient approach with her, where my son, I can kind of just say, listen, let's get to it. So that was like I said, that was a big learning experience for me. And it was every year, like I would always try and push the envelope just a little bit. And then my mother would finally just say to me, like, are we really going to do this again?
Going to do this again.
Like, no, all right, we're not going to do it again. And then by the time you hit 4th or 5th grade, it was just like, all right, this is silly. I'm not winning these battles. It's over.
But it's crazy because we encourage, because I think questioning a lot of obviously critical thinking is embedded in there. And that's, as educators, we're always encouraging students or young people to think critically. So, there is that fine line. And I think you kind of alluded to that. Like, there is that fine line between, not just always accepting things as they are, but then also not pushing it to the level of, where you're kind of being quote unquote disrespectful, or too inquisitive. So, we were my wife and I were having that conversation similar about our daughter, and I started talking, she's 13, and my wife was like, well, when my mom and my dad told me to do something, we just did it, and I said, there's a lot of generational things going on at play here. And then I said, and I bet, we got this amnesia sometimes. If we really went back and saw what we really were doing, we weren't always just doing what they said.
No, I don't think any kid, I always laugh because when I talk with other teachers or other adults, that I'm like, there's no way when you were in class, you were a perfect angel and you always paid attention and you always did this. Like, they're kids. That's what they do. Yes. And we've chosen to work with specific age, group kids. And like, when I look at like the middle school teachers and the high school teachers, I relate to my son and his friends there in high school, but I relate to them more like in a, dad kind of friendly with them, whereas that can't happen with a teacher. So, but like elementary wise, I just really connect with kids that age. And, it's interesting that, we all kind of pick the level that we like to work with. And, middle school for me is always the one that's the toughest. The kids are going through such transitions, and, you see it with your own kids. Like you said, you got a 13-year-old, I got a 12-year-old. And you just see like the things that once didn't matter now really matter. Like my daughter will start putting on, makeup every now and then. And I'm like, what are you wearing? It's makeup. I'm like, I don't like that. Like she's getting too old too quick, and it's just how it happens.
Yes. So true. Growing up and seeing those, especially with our preteens and teens, it was beautiful. The profile picture was beautiful that you shared with us, that we were able to put up on the for the flyer with your family in it. So thank you for sharing that with your son and your daughter. So we talked a little bit about this. You mentioned it, but I want to go deeper into it. You talked about hockey. And you talked about the fact that your dad was like, you're too small to play, or so on and so forth. Can you talk? And I was, as a kid, I was tiny, man. And I was like, I always felt like I had to prove myself on the athletic fields or so on and so forth. And my parents always thought I was going to be killed playing sports, or sometimes just playing outside, Casey, just like going outside. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because like I said, a lot of what I love about this show and platform is that we get to hear some origin stories, because I believe that we are like superheroes and we get to hear those origin stories. But then there are also maybe some students out there who are experiencing something similar. So can you talk, like, how did you get to a point of confidence, in terms of participating in athletics and so on and so forth?
So I never really, it wasn't me that had the lack of comp. Like my dad wouldn't let me play football either. And I remember in middle school, I was, we were playing football in gym, and the quarterback of the Pop Warner team is the quarterback, and I'm the wide receiver. He's throwing me balls, and he's like, "How come you don't play football? You should play football." I go home. I'm like, "Dad, I got to play football." He's like, "You're not playing football. You're going to get hurt." And I kind of later on understood it, which was, if you remember the old days of how insurance worked, which was you paid the bill and then you had to get reimbursed for it. Well, we had a one family, my dad was the only one that worked, and he stretched a buck as far as it could go. And that, it wasn't until I got older that I really understood that. So in terms of like my size, the thing that was the issue too was because I started school when I was 4, which I never realized this until I was older, that my dad said this to me. He goes, "If I knew that you were going to play sports the way you wanted to play sports, I wouldn't have started you in school at 4, because you were always physically a year behind everybody." And I never ever once when I was playing ever thought of that. It was just, I don't really care if you're bigger than me. Yes, physically you might be bigger than me, but mentally that doesn't mean you're bigger than me. And we used to just play hockey out in the street, and it ranged from like my older brother to, we used to, I remember when we were in high school, we would play against different groups in the town, street hockey. And you would be, I was a freshman on our little town, section of town team, and we're playing against seniors that are like the size of my dad. And, there wasn't any real checking and stuff like that, but the physical size never really did anything to me. And in fact, I remember when I was playing baseball, I was on this 12-year-old team, and the pitcher for our team was like one of those kids from the Little League World Series that throws 75, 80 miles an hour. He was 12 years old. He had a beard.
Wow.
They used to just hand his birth certificate at the beginning of the game.
No questions.
Right. And I could only catch him for like 6 or 7 innings before my hand started to hurt so bad I'd be in tears. But like, I took it as a challenge. Like, I'm going to do this. And so in terms of like, athletics, I always kind of looked at it like the size doesn't matter, because sometimes in sports being smaller makes you more elusive, which can be a good thing, And by the way, you could be small and still be faster than somebody else. It doesn't mean that because they're bigger than you, they run faster than you, at least at, a younger age. Obviously, if you're playing in the NFL, that's probably not the case. But, but one of the things that I did take away from playing hockey was I remember the first time I like really played in a street hockey league. And there was I don't know if you know where I don't know what it's called now, but it used to be called Tab Ramos. It's off of Blair Road in Aberdeen. And it started out as being a indoor beach volleyball place. And in the back, they had this little hockey rink that was about the size of a basketball court. I used to play 4-on-4 there. And I remember people asking me, "Where did you play hockey?" And I'm like, "Nowhere." They're like, "What do you mean nowhere?" They're like, "Well, how'd you get so good?" I go, I just play in the street. Like, I would go out in the street and practice by myself and stuff. And then it kind of dawned on me, because I was going to college at the same time. I'm like, if I taught myself how to do that and I didn't have any coaching and I go to class, there's a pro in front of the class that I could just ask anything I want and get the answers to. Like, this is silly. Like, and it wasn't like I was struggling. It just kind of had this epiphany, like, that person is paid to help me. And if I could teach myself how to do this and be successful, then I should be able to really put my mind to anything else that I want to do with the help of somebody in front of the room who is an expert in that area. And that's when it kind of clicked for me with school and everything. Like, because I always kind of did well, but I was never like the A+ student. I get A's and B's and do fine. But that was when it like clicked for me. And then I just started like really, doing, striving every time, like, I'm going to get an A, I'm going to get an A, because it really started to matter. And there was a personal challenge to me in order to be able to do that.
Wow. That's a great story, man. And, a lot of times when I'm talking to teachers, educators, I say there's so many epiphanies that come to us in the margins of our educational lives. Like, sometimes we think that it's all going to happen during this direct instruction period. And, like you just shared a story of like, it translated and transferred to educational experience, but it kind of started outside of that realm. Like, it hit you outside of that, because I think as teachers, we're always looking for that dynamic moment. And then sometimes it can just be having a conversation on the side with a young person that is that dynamic moment, that you never think that, oh, that was it,
Oh, yeah. And I say to my students all the time, Because I'm fortunate and it works right now because I have a son that's 15. So he doesn't play video games as much as he used to, but, he would play Fortnite and I would sit and watch him and he'd be playing with his friends and he's like, why don't you play? So I'd play. And I remember the first time I played, I just hid in a bush. And he's like, you're a bush camper. And I'm like, what's a bush camper? And he says, you're just hiding out, hoping to get to the end. And I go, that's right. And then it dawned on me, I have students that are bush campers. They'll hide in the classroom, hoping I don't call on them. So now I relate that to them. I'll say, do you play Fortnite, right? They're like, yeah. I'm like, you know what this is? They're like, yeah. I'm like, well, why are you better than me at that? Well, I practice, I play, I participate. I go, right. So if I was hiding in a bush for the entire game, would you think I was really playing? They go, no. I go, that's the same thing as being in class and not asking any questions. And they're like, oh, you're right. It is, so like you got to try and make, and again, I won't be, listen, in another 10 years, I'm not going to have those references because there's not going to be somebody at my house playing those video games, right? Yes. So, trying to find those things that connect to kids outside of school, like you said, I think are important, and just letting them know that they're better at things than I am, and they're better at them because they do them more frequently, and that they can be as good in something else if they just put in the effort. And a lot of times we want to practice things that we're good at because we get the self-satisfaction. Yes. We don't necessarily go through the struggle. So like if you take a kid that is, and I remember when my son would play basketball and you would just see a kid that was like 6 years old and you're like, how is that kid so good? Mm-hmm. The kid just has it. Right. He didn't sit down at 6 and figure out like, well, I'm going to do this, this, and this. He may have watched an older brother and picked up the ball and just started doing the same things, or an older sister and started doing the same things. But you have to try and connect that to school to say the way you keep working at that, you have to keep working at school because ultimately, when you talk to a lot of particularly young boys, I will say, and now we're starting to see more professional girls leagues, with the WNBA and soccer coming to fruition, and there's some softball leagues around as well. You hear from boys mostly like, I'm going to be a professional athlete. Like that's what I said. I'm going to be a professional baseball player. And then when I was in 10th grade and I was still 5'6", I'm like, yeah, this isn't going to happen. I better start thinking about something else. So, you have to still, you don't want to kill their dream because you want them to have their dream, but you have to let them know they can't really put all their eggs in one basket, and that even if you do make it to be a pro, you still need to be educated. You need to know what to do with all that money when you get it, Exactly. So I think there's a lot of where you try to connect the outside world to what's really happening and don't really just look at your classroom as being this, thing that this box they come to for a certain amount of hours a day and leave. You want them to try to bring their own experiences into it and connect it to it. Yes. And in math, by the way, that's very easy to do because when you're dealing with numbers, you can relate them to so many different topics. So once you find out something that a student likes, you can really relate those numbers to those area of interest.
Nice. So, man, that was just masterfully put together all the way from the Fortnite. Who would have thought we would talk Fortnite? My son would be so excited right now to hear Fortnite being discussed by two educators. And, that analogy that you used is like excellent, the bush camper one. And my son plays, so I'm somewhat familiar with what you're talking about. And if I were playing like a battle royale game like that, I probably would try to do the same thing. But you're right. If you're not practicing these skills, you're never going to get better.
Right.
So even if you're struggling, at least you're practicing, and then you can get away from that bush, and then hide and stop hiding. And the way you kind of equated that to what happens in a classroom, I'm sure that the students really, really appreciated that. That was really, really well done. And I'm going to use that now when I have a conversation with my kid.
Well, you could tell him too that the other thing I add to that is because the game, the storm closes in on you. Yes. I tell them all the time, the storm is the math test. You can bush camp in here all you want, but that test is coming. And at some point, you are going to have to come outside of that bush and try and do something. Otherwise, the game will just last forever, and or the person's going to find you. So, like, it eventually happens where you might as well just start participating now and practicing. And by the way, for some kids, I say this all the time. I think if any educator had the answer to how to do that, they'd be a billionaire. Because, kids aren't widgets. They're all individuals. And for some kids, I used to say that when I was a homeroom teacher, and this was drilling this stuff all the time, just they keep hearing me saying things over and over again. I said, like, some of your kids won't get this till January, and some of them might not get it till June, and some of them might not get it till years after that. Like, sometimes that aha moment doesn't happen until you get older and you're just not ready for it there. But, you can try and instill those things in them and be a positive influence in their lives.
So true. I was talking to kindergarten teachers the other morning, and that was what we were talking about, because they were thinking mastery versus exposure. And I think as teachers, we automatically go to, we want students to master something. That's just built into us as educators. And, we started getting into the conversation of, but some of it is exposure, because like you just said, it may take 2 more months, 3 more months, or it may come in that first part of the first grade year where it kind of clicks and then the mastery begins. But if we never expose them to it, then we will never get mastery, period.
And I think the other thing too, I had asked my students, this was maybe about 5 or 6 years ago when I was still a homeroom teacher. And I just said, do you think my job is to teach you what to think or to teach you how to think? And every single kid said my job was to teach them what to think. And I said, no, you don't understand. I don't want you thinking what I think. It's my job to, like, if we were doing something with social studies, give you 2 opposing viewpoints and have you determine what the answer may have been, So like if we were talking about Columbus and Columbus Day, like just looking at the different viewpoints of it and not trying to put what my own viewpoint was on it, because that doesn't really matter. Just giving them the facts as to how people see things. And, I said, in reality, you have to grow up and learn how to think for yourself. So the quicker you start doing that, the better you're going to be at it. If you only just basically parrot what people say to you, then ultimately you're never thinking for yourself. And then when you try to get on your feet later on in life, you really don't know how to think. And that's the problem. So that was kind of a wake-up call for me. Is I was kind of like, wow, I really thought I was going to have some students who said, no, like, you're supposed to teach us how to think. But every single kid, from like your top kid to your kid that struggles the most, all thought the same thing. And I was like, wow, we really have to change the perception of what happens in here. And I kind of took that moving forward of, like I'll say to my students that I have now, because a lot of them will struggle with math, is, it's, well, how are you thinking about doing this? What's the strategy that you're doing? Why are you doing that? And trying to delve more into what are they actually doing, as opposed to just saying, here, watch, this is how you do this. Because anybody can learn stuff from doing it rote. But there's a reason why, and I don't know if you're a mechanic or not. My dad was a mechanic, so I kind of relate things to mechanics. And, it always amazed me how he could just fix anything. Yep. And he would go, what sound's the car making? It's doing this. Okay, what happens when it does this? Like, but he could show me how to fix it, and maybe I could fix it, but I didn't know how to diagnose it. He was like the doctor for the car. So like, he knew how to think about, like, I know how this piece works with this piece, and that sound might relate to this. Like, so instead of just being able to say, well, I don't know how to solve the problem, but if you tell me what it is, I can fix it because I watched somebody do it 10 times. So, you kind of just see that in almost everything that you do in life. Is how do you tackle problems and how do you think about them is really what's going to make your students succeed in life. And I often say this, there may be a few lessons that you remember in life when you're an adult, but in reality, most of what we do and who we become as people are those things that we learn without knowing we were learning them, to become, say, boys becoming young men, then becoming men, and girls becoming young ladies and becoming ladies. Like all those little things that the teachers or adults we ran into that we saw along the way, that we just kind of took in, and we didn't realize it at the time. And we did them because if I think back to my school, like there's like a handful of lessons that I can remember, but school had to be much more than that.
Yes.
Because how would I have been here if it's only 5 lessons that I can remember?
Yes.
So I think teaching kids how to think is what's the most important thing. And yeah, they're going to struggle with that. But, the sooner we start to do that. And by the way, I think a lot of people do that. You'll see a lot more today with parents asking questions like, why did you do that? As opposed to like when we were kids, I told you not to do that. Go to the room. Now we start to, the parenting has also changed as well, which, is kind of spilled over into the classroom. And, sometimes with the classroom, though, we don't have all the time in the world when a kid makes a poor decision to have, you still have things you have to do. So like, we may have to put that on the back burner for a bit. But, that's a juggling act that we do, and everybody does it.
Yeah, and I think that you're right. The opening those open-ended questions. I think as we have grown older, it's been more about open-ended questions with young people as opposed to don't do this, don't do that, and that even when I would give parents advice, when I was a school principal, a lot of times it would go back to, start having some more open-ended questions, even if they did something that you didn't really like and that wasn't the right thing to do, but going through that thinking process because they're going to be in a similar situation again. So at least if you're thinking then, okay, well, what are some of the better outcomes I can get by doing something different? So what you said kind of leads me into a next question, something that you said in terms of, it kind of goes back to what I said is that, a lot of education happens on the peripheral. It kind of happens on the outside and not always at the center. And you said I can only remember like maybe 5 lessons, but there was obviously a complete experience that I had that kind of, molded me to be who I am today, a lot of. So was there a teacher, Casey, that when you look back over your years, that inspired you? I know you went off to Keene, and majored in education, but was there, I think it was psychology, you said, was there any teacher K through 12 that you can recall that had an impact on you that you just have a vivid memory or experience with?
K to 12, it's interesting. K to 12, not really. It really was this one college teacher that I had. And it was a psychology teacher. It wasn't an teaching mathematics teacher or anything like that. Listen, I had fond experiences in every grade, and I still think that I can name every teacher that I ever had, K to 12. So obviously they had to have some impact on me. But I had one teacher in college and her name was Dr. Busquets, and she did something that no other teacher I think ever had done. And I think it related to the fact that she was, a doctorate in psychology. And she just took the anxiety out of learning. And it was like, well, if you don't understand this, that's fine. I have office hours. You could come and see me. I'll make myself available to you. She'd explain it 3 different ways so you understood it. She connected to your life so you understood it. And I was just like, wow, that just made things so easy. And I never really realized how much your own, which I didn't even know that it was called anxiety at that time.
At that point,
so your own trepidations are like, wow, how that gets in the way. And if you can remove those and you can just ease people down to like, just, all right, let's take a breath, take a break. And, we'll come back to understanding this. And like I said, I use my daughter as an example because she's so much like me when I was younger. Like if I didn't get something, I would just because I thought I have to know this now. And that's not the case. So, she'll do math and, she's in 7th grade now. And, some of the math she does, I'm still like, all right, hold on. I really got to look at this. And it's funny because now I'm one of those parents where, I've been teaching everyday math for so long that parents are like, you guys don't do math the way
you're not doing it the way. Yes.
Right. But now I'm experiencing that. I'm like, I wouldn't solve that problem that way. I'm like, why is your teacher having you do it this way? And I'm like, oh, I sound like, but so I had to like turn back to the teacher on me. But, just being and trying to reduce that anxiety, say we can get it. That was the biggest impact that a teacher ever had on me. The one thing I do remember from elementary school was we always had this principal, Mr. Sherman, and he would come in. He did the strangest thing as a principal, and I've never seen another principal do this again. He loved sports. He was a minor league baseball player, and he would just come in. And it looked like I think back as a teacher now, it looked like he would just walk into the classroom and tell the teacher, all right, I'm taking the kids to the gym and we're going to go play a game. And now I think as a teacher, I'm like, didn't the teacher have a lesson plan? Like he just walked in, was like, I'm taking the kids. But, it was the 80s. I guess you could do it. And I have fond memories of that, like just getting the break. Oh, wow, he's here. It's going to be free. And then like it kind of rejuvenated you. So, I don't know if I directly did this, but when I was a homeroom teacher, I would try to like if, kids did well on things or we were working hard, maybe take a day and go outside and play kickball for a little bit, but I also feel too that as some of those things have gone away because as we've gotten more into test results and, the standards and like the things that made school, particularly elementary school, that real fun experience. I don't know how we get back to that because as long as we still have this, and I don't mean the state being like a bad guy, but as long as we still have so many we have the politics involved of education and new standards and packing as much as we can in. And by the way, that's a lot of pressure on those kids. And it's not like when we were younger where, you do like a thematic unit, which you didn't know that what it was called back then. And, you might come to school dressed up like a pilgrim or something like, you still see that from time to time in school, but not as much as you used to, and those were the things that made school, like, at least if you were not a great student, it still made you want to go. It kind of broke up that it's all academic for you.
Yes. And it was a way of connecting, and I think that you're right. And it seems like the more years that go on, the more things we are accountable for. And I think that it's hard to be spontaneous, like you just talked about, in situations where there's so much accountability. And let's not, accountability is a good thing, but there are also two things can be right at the same time. Like we can find those areas to be spontaneous, as you just described. It's so funny. The story you just shared about the anxiety in that one college professor being able to kind of relieve you and other students of that during the learning process. I was in Lloyd Road yesterday, and I was doing a teacher observation. And it was a special, and one of the teachers, the homeroom teacher, was dropping off the students to the special. And it was the greatest conversation the homeroom teacher was having with the special teacher, explaining with another student that the student was having some anxiety based on, some things that were going on. And they worked out right there in 5 minutes, kind of worked out a system where the student would be able to communicate to the teacher those anxieties. And I was just blown away because, again, there's so many little things that are happening in classrooms like that could never be in a lesson plan, that most times no one sees, and it occurs. And it's like, it's the magic of having, professionals and adults in kids' lives who really are in tune and paying attention to their needs. So it's funny that you just brought that story up with anxiety, because I saw it firsthand yesterday.
And I think too that, times have changed. Like, when we were younger, it was, boys are tough, shut up, do what you're supposed to do. I've shared this with people I know, but I feel like now, like, I don't have a problem sharing this information. I remember I had an anxiety attack when I was maybe in my early, I don't know, I've been like 19 or 20, and I didn't know what it was. I felt like a bomb went off in my chest. And, the worst thing that you do is you try to pinpoint it to one thing that caused it. And it took me many, many years, going to see a psychiatrist, to talk to him and understanding how your mind body works. And when I see students struggle, like I had a kid this year say to me in another class, and I gave her so much credit because, you think about how times have changed, is that this girl was like, I'm starting to have anxiety, and she's in 4th grade. And it's getting in the way of stuff. And I go, that's interesting. I get that too. Where, like, 15 years ago, I might not have shared that with somebody because I felt like, oh, was I weak because that happened to me? But now, like, you see it all the time. And I said to her, I'm like, listen, you're not going to be able to pinpoint that one thing. Anxiety is something that builds up over time. And then eventually you get that feeling of like, hey, why do I have this nervous feeling? And you try to target it to one thing, but it's not one thing. It's basically the straw that broke the camel's back. You try to think it's that one thing. And I said, I tried to do a little breathing thing with her, and it just kind of distracts you a little bit. And then you get back to doing what you're doing. But like, I gave her so much credit to be able to almost diagnose herself and say, hey, this is getting in the way of what I'm trying to do. And I'm thinking like, wow, she's leaps and bounds ahead of where I was in 4th grade. But I also think that's because we talk a lot now about social emotional learning, and that kids start to, in their morning meetings, they start, they're not an island unto themselves. They start to hear that, like, what happens to me is the same thing that happens to other people. And to be able to share those experiences kind of makes it, a closer knit community within the classroom.
Yes. And, and those are the outcomes that can't be tested. But what you just explained, it's proof of learning. That's proof that young person learned those skills, to advocate for herself and self-regulation, like all of that, was built into that. So that's really, and that's something you can't put on a standardized, assessment. So that's the beautiful thing that happens and that we get a chance to experience. And
by the way, we've had some people, Ted Kaczynski, for those people who know who he is, was probably a great test taker. Okay. But he was also a really bad guy when he got older. So, he was the Unabomber. So let's remember, everything isn't always about standardized tests. It's about creating well-rounded individuals who essentially are striving to do the best they can. Yes. And if the best they can isn't that they can score a level 5 on a standardized test, then so be it.
Yes. Agreed.
The world's not going to end because of that.
Yes. Very, very well said. And I'm right in line with that. Very well said. I feel like we're at the point of the conversation, Casey, to talk about why you chose education, as a major. I know your psychology, and I know that professor had an impact on you, but when did it hit you that, I want to work with young people, I want to teach?
So I don't have it wasn't like one thing that just made me go, I want to do this. I was in high school and I was getting, like junior year, and I was, things started clicking for me, like school wise. And I was like, what do I really want to do? What are my interests? And I always found that, excuse me, that anytime like I had, people would come to my house and they had younger kids there. I don't know. I just kind of was able to connect with them. And then I started working at a summer camp because my aunt worked for like the parks department, not the parks, like within the parks department in Old Bridge Township. And I started working at a summer camp, and I liked that. And then when I was in college, I started working at an after school program, and I was like, yeah, this really is something I like doing. And, I remember when I took one of my education classes, the teacher goes, if you're here because you think you like kids, you are not going to be here very long, because you are going to be more frustrated by children than you are thinking you like them. So, I already had an experience with working with kids and watching them struggle, but being able to work through those struggles. And, listen, there's a set, even when you're helping someone, there's a sense of selfishness, right? Because you get a good feeling out of it. So like I had that good feeling of being able to help people out. And I was like, you know what? I think this is the path for me. And as I was going through college, I kept working at that summer camp and working at that after school program. So I kept having those interactions, and I was fortunate enough to be able to be working with teachers because they ran the programs. So I could pick their brains to hear like the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I was like, they didn't really say anything that scared me off. So I was like, yeah, I think I'll keep doing this. And then when I did my student teaching and stuff, I really was just like, yeah, this is going to be for me. And I say this to people all the time. Although we don't get our paychecks in our mailboxes anymore, I've always said that if I go to my mailbox and I take that pay stub out and I go, this is why I'm here, it's time for me to leave. And I've yet to have that experience. So, fingers crossed that won't happen to me, because I do really enjoy, not only teaching the kids, but just interacting with them. I think it keeps you young when you interact with younger people. And not to say that I'm an old fart, but every time I look in the mirror, I get older and older. So
it does though, it's almost like even at home, right? My wife, and she's in education, but she works as a secretary. And she actually works in a central office, a centralized location. So she's not around children, right? So there's a lot of things that I can connect with our children, who my son is 11 and then my daughter's 13. I can connect with them and I can say little things that they're like, how do you know that? Or, and then she tries to use it and they always make fun of her because it doesn't sound the same way. Because being around children, it's just this added advantage. Yep. If you're listening anyway, it's an added advantage in terms of understanding youth culture.
Yeah. Oh, I the other day was talking to Mr. Hoggy, who's right across the hallway from me. I go into his room and I said to him, Mr. Hoggy, you don't have any drip. And he's like, what? And one of the kids starts laughing. I said, who has more drip? He's like, what's drip? I'm like, your daughter's not old enough yet. Because my son will tell me all the time, Dad, you have no drip. I'm like, I'm full of drip. And then he's like, you wear the same outfit to work every day. I go, yeah, pretty much. He goes, that's not drip. I was like, all right. But like, having that, like having a teenager around gives you those references and then allows me to connect the other way to the kids that I teach. Obviously if I was a first grade teacher, that, that wouldn't fly, but fourth and fifth grade,
yes. And when you hear it, and the other part of that, Casey, and I don't know if you experienced this, is that a student can say that in that classroom. And if the teacher doesn't have a concept of what they're saying, you can sometimes assume that they're saying something that is so wrong and something that, needs some kind of consequence because it may cause kids to laugh or so on and so forth. So it even adds that part to it as well.
Yeah. And, and I'll use it. I mean, maybe today I'll go in there and use another one. Your son, how old's your son?
Yeah. My son is 12. 11. He's 11. He's going to turn 12.
Do they use the term bussin' when they talk about food?
Listen, so I got a text. We have a family group text, So we were at the YMCA, my son and I, and my daughter texts, and my wife's on the text, and she's like, Wawa would be so bussin' right now, right?
Yep.
My wife doesn't have a clue what. There's like question mark, me busted, and I'm cracking up because I'm like, she doesn't even get it. Yeah. So yes.
Well, we had an argument the other day at my house about what sus means. My daughter says it means suspicious. My son says it means suspect. And I'm like, it can mean both. So everybody was right, But no one, like you said, knowing those little things allows you to connect to students and, kind of puts a face on like, oh, you're just not this person that is at this building. You have a life outside of the building and, you have a family and listen, we all have the same experiences. Your kids are going to succeed. They're going to fail. The kids you have in class are going to succeed and fail. And, that's just life.
Yes, agreed. I listen, I'm cracking up inside and outside because those experiences, they just make so much of a difference. And if you're willing to learn, if you see it as youth culture and you're willing to be like, okay, what can I learn about this culture? There's so much more that you can unlock in terms of what we do in education. So thank you for sharing that. As we begin to wind down, Casey, one of the things that I wanted to ask you is, was there ever a time, well, let's go through this. You talked about how you had the one interview, you went through that process and you got offered the job. You didn't have anything else lined up. So you get into the classroom, and I think you said you started off at fourth grade math over at Lloyd Road. You get into teaching. And this is, think of now, and even in your role as a union union president, who obviously represents teachers, think about a novice teacher now, okay? And I know that you have to do a lot of coaching, of novice teachers in your role. If you could talk about, was there times when you first started yourself of like, oh my God, I can't do this, or it's so overwhelming? And if there were, how did you manage through those times?
So obviously the best advice I ever got was from a baseball coach I had when I was 16 to 18. And he knew that I wanted to go to school to be a teacher. And then, after I became a teacher, I ran into him. He's like, listen, you are going to think you are the greatest thing since sliced bread your first year. He goes, you're going to look back in 3 years and say, you didn't know what you were doing. And he was 100% right. Like, you come out, you're like, hey, like I was like, hey, I work with kids all year long and I did my student teaching. Like, I'm ready to go. And I didn't really have a problem being in front of kids and teaching and the content. It was really just all the other things that come into play. Like, making sure these things were in on time, right? Attending staff, like I'll never forget. I missed 2 staff meetings the first year. One of them, I had a screw fall out of one of my glasses, and I couldn't wear my glasses. So I had to find it, and I showed up late for the meeting. And the next one I totally forgot about. The principal was like, listen, that's 2 meetings. You do that again, I'm writing you up. And I was like, there's a wake up call. Like, okay, I get it. Yeah. So like managing all of that stuff is the hard part of like, what do you have to do in terms of getting stuff in on time or paperwork that has to be put in, like, and I don't mean lesson plans, but like, we used to do these, like these multicultural reports we used to have to fill out and filling those out. And people are like, well, why do I have to keep filling these out? Like, they see my lesson plans. What are we doing? And I'm just like, I don't know. We just have to do it. So it's managing all that extra paperwork. And I think that takes a lot of time before you start to get in the groove. And then, and just when you think you have a groove, and this is the thing that that's really hard for people, especially in the elementary level, is we get new programs a lot.
Yeah.
Like you're in a groove, and then it's like, you see this year, there's a new ELA program, right? And then it's like, and I was thinking this year, like, please do not put a math program in at the same time, because while Lloyd Road is only, ELA and math are separate, I go, there is no way they're going to be able to handle this in a K-3, 2 new programs at one time, just never going to fly. And the fact that, when you teach every single subject, which I did for many, many years, the volume of paperwork and the things that you have to keep thinking about, and what you're also trying to do is, you're trying, and I'm not saying this doesn't happen at the upper grades, but like, if you're the math teacher at the high school and you're teaching algebra 2, for argument's sake, you may not be trying to connect that to the book that your students are reading. But when you're in elementary school, you're trying, like, you're like, how do I wrap this all into one? And not necessarily so that it's all thematic, but that, and how to do that is just something that takes a lot of time to do. So there wasn't really one thing that really overwhelmed me. But the one thing I did kind of say to myself, and I had a mentor who was like, listen, I'm really not going to get in your way. If you have questions, come and ask me. And I never had, like I said in the very beginning, I never had a problem questioning things. So if I had questions, I would go and ask. And, I always had that thing, like from playing sports, when I failed playing sports, I never liked the feeling of it. So I was also raised in a house where I kind of love telling the story. So the old flip phones, like you used to be able to like write your name on it. It might say Elford's phone. I picked up my dad's phone one day. This is probably like 15 years ago. And it said A plus E equals P. Now, my dad's no algebra expert. I go, what does this mean? He goes, anticipation plus effort equals preparedness. And I went, okay. He goes, so if you could think it can happen, and you put in the effort so that it could happen, you'll be prepared. I was like, wow. All right. So I don't live my life to a level of paranoia, but like prepare for the worst, hope for the best is kind of the way that I am. So I've always kind of looked at things that, are going to be overwhelming. And I think when the pandemic happened and we had to form all these teams of how we were going to reopen school, I remember sitting in my garage. And I just had this blank look on my face, and my wife walked in and started talking to me about my daughter's dance, like that was coming up and how they were going to make it COVID safe. I'm like, I can't even talk about this now. She's like, why? I'm like, I am so overwhelmed by this. I have no idea how I'm going to do this because there was so much on like an administrator side that I had no experience with. So Aaron Eiler and I were doing it, and I called him, and he's like, oh no, we already have stuff like this team's in place for that. And I'm like, oh my God, like I was just like, I don't know how. And I'm like 45 years old, and I'm like ready to crumble to the ground. Like, and I hadn't had that feeling in a long time because it was so much at one time, and I couldn't take little chunks out of it because, as you know, we got that guidance, and then it was like in a month you have to have everything planned out, and you're like, all right. But, getting back to like when I first started in school, I had a lot of people that I could lean on. Like I remember across the hallway was this woman, Shirley Orleans, and she passed away, but she'd come in and check on me. How you doing today? How's it going? And she was a big sports buff, so we could talk and I could relate to her. She was also somebody that had been around the block. So I knew, like, I would hear things that she would say. And I'm like, I can't say that. Like,
I can't get away with that.
I've been around here long enough to be questioning things like that. Like now I'm just a good soldier who kind of goes with the flow. And, and to this day, I tell people all the time as a union president, like, I don't get paid to run the district. So like I follow directions like you do. I don't get to give directives to people. So like, we have processes and protocols in place if we don't agree on things, but like, I'm just like you, they say, this is what we're teaching. This is what we're teaching. Like, if you don't like it, and I say this to people, like, you should go become an administrator and then you can have that impact that you want to have. But right now, that's not really what we do. We're like the sous chefs, and the chef is telling us what to do is basically what it is.
So much powerful stuff, Casey. What a great conversation. I mean, you share so much about just your personal experiences, your family experiences. We got some pop and youth culture in here. We talked about Fortnite, your experiences athletically, overcoming some challenges. It's just so many things. And then your family, talked about mom, talked about dad, and the impacts that they had all the way up into the flip phone. I like that. I think that's cool. That's really cool. And anticipation is really because it's that thinking, that thinking ahead, which is
Yep.
essential. One of the things that we love to ask our guests, Casey, is you gave us so much, but we like to ask if you could go back to your high school self and give your high school self advice, what that advice would be and why.
So for me, it's pretty simple. There's two things. One would be to listen more, and the other would be to be more patient. Now, I'm not sure how you could tell yourself to be more patient, because when you're young, learning to pump the brakes is a hard thing to do, like especially as an adolescent, because that's just kind of a drive that's in you. You want things now. But, like I think back to the kids that were in high school that were like really successful students. They didn't seem to be, they were on the go with their academics, but they just had like a calmness to them. Now, maybe that was just a front when they were in school, because, they always had, a ton of homework and extra things that they did. But I think listening more is a big thing. And I would tend to do that. Like I used to like to sit around with like my aunts and uncles and just listen to them talk, if, like at family things, and just maybe ask them things about like when they were younger, how things happened. But I think I didn't do that enough with people like that were, let's say, my parents' age, who were teachers, because at that age, you kind of battle your parents, and then you're also kind of battling with your teachers a little bit, because you're that adolescent and you want that freedom. So I think I would have just said, listen more, and then just take that in, just because listening more, you just learn a whole lot from other people's experiences, and, I think we all think if we could all go back in time and do things again, that would be the thing for me, would be to just say, try and just listen more, and not think that your world is the only world that there is. Like I jokingly was saying to someone else, someone I work with, that, listen, the world would be a perfect place if everybody thought like me. But everybody can say that, right? Yep. But that's not the world. So, we all have to kind of adapt to the different people that are around us. And I think I wish I was better at that when I was younger. Now I kind of have learned to kind of just go, look, I can't control that stuff. It's out of my control. Yes. And that's that. I wish I did that more when I was younger.
Wow. Very, very well said. And I'm definitely big into listening. And I'm one of those folks who, like you said, I used to like to, and I still do like to listen into conversations of more experienced folk or anybody, because I just think there's always opportunities to learn. And that's another thing about this show, is it just provides opportunities for us to listen to stories. So thank you, Casey, for joining the show, getting on extra early this morning, 7:30 this morning, but really bringing some electricity to our podcast, our district podcast. And we really appreciate you for doing that. Is there anything that you would like to say in closing before we say so long to the community?
No, just thanks for having me. And, to any kids or parents that are listening out there, listen, we've all had our ups and downs, whether it's a parent working with their own child or the student struggling with school. It happens to everybody. So, you just got to take one day at a time. And for the kids, if you do struggle, participate, get involved in class, because you're not the only one.
Yes. Love it. No more bush camping. Get out of those.
Right. No bush camping. No more bush camping.
Get out of those bushes and start to participate in the game. So thank you again, Casey. Thank you to the Husky family. I know it's bright and early, but we have another one for the archive that we will be able to go back and watch years and years and years from now. A great story from Casey Barilka. So to the community, be safe, have a great weekend, and we will see you next week for another. We got a special, we have a retirement edition next week, Casey. Yeah, so we have a special guest next week. One of our Huskies is retiring, and we wanted to make sure that we got her. I'm not going to give it totally away, but we got her on the Husky to Husky podcast before she says so long to the district. So again, salute to you, Casey. Have a great day and take care. Madawan, see you soon.
All right, everybody have a happy Halloween.